Looking at the ongoing imagery out of Kabul, it's hard to know what's worse. The likelihood that tens of thousands of Western citizens and visa holders will still be left behind, abandoned, even though 60,000 people have already been airlifted out. The dreadful fate awaiting 40 million Afghans, once more under the Taliban's barbaric rule, particularly women and girls, consigned once again to a half-life, or the blow to America's leadership with the humiliating abandonment of a 20-year campaign to build a degree of freedom and limit the scourge of global Islamist terrorism. At the just concluded G7 meeting held overnight, online, Britain's Boris Johnson pressed US President Joe Biden to extend the deadline for the final US withdrawal beyond August 31, something that Biden had earlier hinted might happen. But Biden would have none of it overnight. He rebuffed Johnson along with all the other Western leaders who had wanted to give their Afghan allies a fair chance of reaching sanctuary. The likelihood now is that tens of thousands of Western-sympathising Afghans and self-identifying former workers for Western governments and aid agencies will be left to their fate outside the airport at the mercy of their sworn enemies. If the Taliban are true to form, these people are likely to be slaughtered, and I use that word deliberately, to lose their lives in the most brutal of circumstances. For all the Biden administration's huffing and puffing, and the UN's too, about climate catastrophes off into the future, here's a real crisis, a real life and death crisis. And this all-but-senile president is walking away. Biden, it is reported, was worried about terror attacks on US forces at the Kabul airport, which is fair enough, I guess, at one level, I suppose. But does the risk of terrorism justify leaving behind your own people and the people you have a duty to protect? Doesn't going soft on Taliban terrorists now only risk bringing it again back to your own shores in the years ahead? Here's what US Congressman Dan Crenshaw thinks, and he's an Afghan war veteran.
This idea that any American that wants to get to the airport can is a flat out lie. It's been a lie for a while now. We need to send a very clear message to the Taliban. We're not negotiating about our deadline. That should be the message. We should laugh at them when they say that, oh, well, that's a red line for us. You need to be out by August 31st. No. And if you get in our way when we are extracting Americans, we will kill you.
Now, for their part, the Taliban had threatened consequences should the US and its allies try to stay beyond the end of the month. But this latest humbling of a superpower looks more like evidence, isn't it, that America is in retreat. The Taliban have said that they won't let anyone leave after August 31. That's next Tuesday, because they don't want to lose their talent, they say, even though they've also ordered all the women to stay home from work and school on the grounds that they're fighters. They won't know how to deal with women. As well as terrorising their own people, we can expect that the Taliban to treat any Westerners left in Afghanistan after next week as virtual hostages, used to extract further concessions from Western governments. Forget any use of financial and other sanctions, somehow restraining the Taliban from their proven savagery. Any sanctions that the West might apply will be more than wiped away by Russia and China's embrace. Will try and use Afghanistan as a base for proxy attacks on the West. Now, I accept that there was never any easy path forward when you're dealing with such a medieval society, and that not for nothing has Afghanistan been dubbed the graveyard of empires. But having rightly toppled the Taliban regime to eliminate al-Qaeda training camps, the West had a duty to support the new government and to eventually withdraw in a way that gave it its best chance of survival, rather than leave signing everyone to a death warrant. It was always unrealistic to think that a liberal, pluralist democracy could be created from feudalism in 2 decades. That doesn't mean that a half-decent government that didn't commit genocide against its own people nor permit terrorism against ours couldn't have been better sustained with relatively modest, ongoing Western support. The challenge now is to try and ensure that the US regains its confidence and sense of mission as democracy's guardian as quickly as possible, as it did back after the fall of Saigon and the debacle in the desert of Jimmy Carter's failed Iran hostage mission. That'll take time and almost certainly a very different presidency. Meanwhile, amidst everything else, the strengthening of Australia's own defences and our own national resilience, that's now a matter of extreme urgency. At the very least, we must get 90 days of fuel reserves here in Australia, not in a year, not in a decade, but within months, to keep the country going should the seaways to our north be blocked by hostile action. We need to revise our defence orders, rethink that crazy submarine program. All of that now. Afghanistan puts it in the frame, but sometimes I think, unless it relates to COVID, no one in government is really listening. And honestly, given what we're seeing now in Kabul, COVID is the least of our worries.